You ever chew up menthol tabs and then huff gasoline?
No.
Me neither. I genuinely haven't, just in case that gets us staying in.
Hello and welcome to A Century in Cinema. I'm Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we discuss a classic film from every year. This week, we're in 1965, taking a look at The Sound of Music from director Robert Wise, starring Julie Andrews, Christopher Plummer, and from 20th Century Fox, which naturally means that you can find this movie on Disney+. I understand you have it, and you listen to the commentaries.
Yes, more on that later.
As always, you can find where to watch our films, where they're streaming, where they're available to rent, down in the show notes.
Nice. Don't forget to tell your friends and family to listen to A Century in Cinema if it seems like something they would be interested in, and give us 5 stars and a nice review on Apple Podcasts. It just helps boost our podcast and helps more people see it. Just helps with the algorithm. We don't really know how it works. It's magic.
Even the people who wrote the algorithms don't know what they're doing anymore, which is concerning.
No, it's like airplanes. No one actually knows what's happening.
They just go from one place to another and it all works out in the end.
Yeah, you're in the metal tube and you shoot across the sky.
All right. As always, I'd like to give us a little bit of context about the year that we are in, 1965, which feels like a bit of a tumultuous year, especially in the United States. The war in Vietnam escalates and worsens as the American military conducts major bombing operations in North Vietnam. And at the same time, anti-war movements grow back home, and 35,000 people march on Washington later in the year as a protest against the war. Malcolm X is assassinated towards the beginning of the year. In the South, Martin Luther King Jr. leads a civil rights march in Alabama from Selma to Montgomery. And that's part of a movement to bring about changes to voting rights for African Americans. And the 1965 Voting Rights Act is signed into law. You also have the Gemini space program, which is part of a larger operation to eventually put a manned mission on the moon. We'll get to that in about 4 years, I think. Yeah, 4 years. In fashion, as you look around at the people walking the streets, you see miniskirts, you see men with long hair. Also, when you go to the store to buy cigarettes now, you're going to get a health warning. They're not that great for you anymore.
Have you ever seen European cigarette packs?
I probably have. I was in Europe for a little while. Why?
They have even stricter laws and requirements on it. And on every pack of cigarettes you buy, there are pictures of people's lungs rotting through and people's throats being like opened. And it's horrible.
Jeez.
And it's the biggest turnoff when it comes to smoking ever. I won't lie. It totally did stop me from smoking while I was over there.
If only such measures could be enacted on other products that are no good for society. Now, as we look at 1965 and the films coming out this year, I do want to ask you, Andrew, where are all the films? I feel like I haven't seen many of the movies that are coming out. Is that because the studio system has basically collapsed at this point? What's going on?
I don't know myself, but it's funny that you mentioned that. A weird, dumb trivia that does not make any sense and is stupid. According to Letterboxd, this is the year in which I have the most films that I own but have not watched.
There's still great films coming out. Don't get me wrong.
Yes, but I would agree. It's like The Sound of Music and The Greatest Story Ever Told. And outside of that, I don't see a bunch of like really big Hollywood movies, although I'm sure they were abound at the time. Also, we're always doing this through Letterboxd lists, which is based off of Letterboxd user popularity. And I do think Letterboxd, for the most part, is a pretty reliable rubric as to which films are most popular and most seen amongst people. So, yeah, I would agree that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of very quote-unquote popular films. My personal favorite of the Silent Man trilogy from Sergio Leone is this year, For a Few Dollars More. I love when the organ comes in. I love the villain in it. I think it's the best one by far. I love that film. Roman Polanski's Repulsion, which, as I've said, was the first official blind buy I ever did for Criterion. Pierrot Le Fou, which is a really great Godard film. And then one of the films I own but I haven't seen is Godard's Alphaville. And all I know about that movie is that it is, the main character in it is kind of the James Bond of France. And Alphaville is Godard being handed the director's reins for essentially a James Bond-esque franchise. And he just flips the whole thing on its head. Speaking of James Bond, Thunderball comes out this year. I really like that one. I think it's really fun.
Again, they all blend together, those early ones.
But I think that was the last Sean Connery one.
You're mistaken because they remade Thunderball with Sean Connery later in the 70s.
But it wasn't an official James Bond licensed project, right?
But it wasn't by MGM, so does it count? But it has Sean Connery. It's not the best one. That's a whole discussion.
Dr. Zhivago, pretty... Well, I'm just going to say a pretty movie that came out.
That is number 2 at the box office this year, by the way. That is the big movie this year besides the one we're going to talk about.
Right. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. Have you ever seen that?
No.
You would thoroughly enjoy it. It's a really pulpy black and white film. Kind of predicts the aesthetic of 70s grindhouse films. Chimes at Midnight, one of the best Orson Welles films, in which he plays Falstaff, which is a common comedic character in Shakespeare plays, and he plays Falstaff through the different Shakespeare plays he appears in, and sort of forges this narrative for his character. It's really great. And Juliet of the Spirits, which is one of my personal favorite Fellini films, and it's 8.5 from his wife's perspective. Those are some that I really like. I'm just nervous about going into some of these that I own but I haven't seen. I Knew Her Well. I own but haven't seen. The Beatles Help. I own but haven't seen. Simon of the Desert, I think, is the only Buñuel film I haven't actually watched, but I do own it. Tokyo Olympiad. Yeah, I don't know. Well, actually, one more. I didn't even realize this one. Kurosawa's Redbeard, which is the last 3-hour plus Kurosawa I have left to watch.
Oh.
Was this year. I don't even own that one. That's why it wasn't in that previous list. But so this is the year of films that I've been really meaning to watch, but just haven't quite watched yet.
I just want to point out the top box office for this year has a lot of films that just, I'm sure they're good, but...
What else? What else besides Dr. Zhivago and Sound of Music?
What's New Pussycat, Von Ryan's Express, Shenandoah, The Great Race?
No, I haven't seen any of these.
Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines from 20th Century Fox.
Horrible title.
But then, number 1, 2, and 3, respectively, are The Sound of Music, Dr. Zhivago, and Thunderball.
Wow.
Those are really the only ones that have kind of stood the test of time from the highest grossing films of 1965. So let's talk about The Sound of Music. So $72 million this year. Just a crazy, huge runaway success. Number 1 at the box office, sweeps Academy Awards, all sorts of accolades.
It remained in theaters for the following, I believe, 3 more years. I think it was in theaters 4 years total. And it during that period usurped Gone with the Wind as the highest grossing film of all time. Of course, once you adjust it for inflation, that wasn't the truth. But it was the number 1 film of all time, and it held that trophy for a little while, I believe.
That's so weird to think about because... films just don't stay in theaters for more than, what is it now, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? It's just a completely different environment for films back in the 1960s. So this was not premiered. It was in a roadshow, I believe.
Oh, yeah. It's because the producers were terrified. But we can't get into that just yet. I gotta give this plot synopsis. So we begin our story in the late 30s in the hills of Salzburg, which are allegedly alive with the sound of music. Our protagonist, Maria, is a nun at the Naumburg Abbey. She is mischievous but kind. However, her fellow sisters do not see her as an asset to the abbey. The Reverend Mother sends her on a task to be a governess for 7 children of the Von Trapp family, whose mother has passed. Upon arrival, she meets the domineering Captain Georg von Trapp, who rules his house with a whistle. He does not enjoy singing or merriment as it reminds him of his late wife. The children are reluctant at first, but they eventually warm to Maria, as does the captain. The eldest daughter, Liesel, is in love with a young soldier named Rolf. More on him later. Maria teaches the children to sing, and although the captain is weary at first, he is ultimately won over and sings with his children and Maria, and they appear to be a family unit. The captain's girlfriend notices that he is beginning to swoon for Maria, and she decides to make Maria feel guilty about the situation. This forces Maria to return to the abbey. After the children attempt to visit Maria, the Reverend Mother goes to her and tells her that the children are looking for her and she has to find her dream by going back to the captain. Maria comes back but finds out the captain is now engaged. She decides to stick it out as a governess and the captain falls for her again. The fiancé realizes that she has lost and leaves. Georg and Maria marry in the abbey that she left, and all is happily ever after. But everything changed when the Nazis attacked. Austria is being occupied, and Georg has decided that he and his family must flee. The night they plan to flee, they are caught by Nazi soldiers. However, they lie and say they were on their way to a singing competition where they are performing. They are able to use this performance as a diversion to escape. As they are escaping, they are caught by Rolf, Liesel's love interest, and they attempt to bring him back to the good side, but he is too far gone. When everything seems hopeless, the family is able to get away in safety because the nuns in the abbey have disassembled the Nazi cars. The film ends where it began, in the hills of Salzburg, but this time Maria is joined by her new family, and they go off and live happily ever after. For real this time.
Based on a true story.
It's true.
I didn't know this until afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so this and Mary Poppins are real mind-blowing to me to imagine a life without having seen them, and then to watch them for the first time in your 20s. Both sides of that coin are really crazy for me to think about. So I'm very curious as to how you felt about this film.
I really liked it. I do want to acknowledge the insanity of the third act. It's not like the Nazis show up out of nowhere, but there's a mood whiplash. You know, if it wasn't there, I don't know if this movie would work nearly as well, but it still feels pretty jarring.
Yeah.
This movie just wouldn't be the same if the Nazis didn't invade at the very end and they didn't have the very heartwarming little song together and the subsequent escape. I don't know if that's an actual opinion. I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
It sounded like you liked it.
Yeah, I did.
This is another film that I've just seen countless times. And
Where do you see these movies countless times? Where was I?
Dude, you had to grow up in a Southern Baptist Christian home where you weren't allowed to watch anything except for these kinds of movies.
I was just watching Jurassic Park many times.
That I was not allowed to watch the Jurassic Park movies. I was told they were too violent.
There is a first time for every film, and yeah, I'm still glad that I got to watch this when I was able to appreciate it. I think it's an extraordinarily well-made film.
Oh, yes. And he's not really in our talking points anywhere because he doesn't have much to do with this film. But I do want to give just a final shout out to Jerome Robbins as Robert Wise. To my knowledge, I don't think he directed any musicals before West Side Story. And then during West Side Story, when he had to come in and direct it, said that he was doing everything based off of what Jerome Robbins was doing. And the next musical he directs is this film, which I think also, just in an impeccable way, is able to capture the feeling and bravura of a musical without completely yanking you out of it, which really is more difficult than good movies make it look. And so I don't know. I feel like Jerome Robbins is sort of an acorn of the reason why this film is as successful in its ambitions as it is.
Jerome Robbins, West Side Story fame.
Right. Directed the musical sequences for West Side Story, and then Robert Wise, in his own words, said that other parts of the film he directed after watching what Jerome Robbins was doing. So
the helicopter shots.
Yeah.
Just crazy. Just wow. Yeah. Very cool. Incredible.
Do you know the story of that opening shot where they fly in on Julie Andrews and then she turns around?
No, tell me it.
They were having to do that multiple times. I think they did it 8 or 9 times. And every time the helicopter would fly all the way in from a far distance, and then she would have to spin around to look forward. And then in the movie, it cuts from her halfway spinning to her standing there and singing.
Yeah.
But in real life, the helicopter kept flying over her and then would have to do a circle around her. And she said that every single time it flew over her and did a circle around her, the wind from it would just throw her into the ground. And all of the other crew members and everything were so far away, like they were all just talking to each other through walkies, which she was not connected to. And she said that she even at one point tried to tell the helicopter pilot with her hands to try and make a wider circle. But he thought she was just waving at her and waved back and gave her a thumbs up that she was doing great, and then flew back. And so she said that just that whole day was nothing but her running forward, spinning, and then just being thrown to the ground immediately, which is hilarious to think of when you watch the film.
Just being assaulted by a helicopter all day.
Yes.
All behind the scenes on a film set.
Get ready for the tidbits on this episode. I know a lot about this movie.
I want to know them.
Well, I do want to give my opinion on this film, because similar to West Side Story, I was in a production of this show. If I may go off on a slight anecdote, this was one of the strangest and honestly worst shows I was ever involved in.
Oh, my.
It had a really strong cast. We all got along really well. I played Friedrich, the eldest son, in it. And we thought we had something really special during the rehearsals. And then our director, his partner of 9 years, left him. It was like a month and a half before we opened. And he had directed the show before. And so he had given our stage manager a VHS recording of the show. And the stage manager was just showing us the VHS. And we had actual children in this cast. You know, me and the girl playing Liesel, we were both fine and we'd been in shows a lot. But some of the younger people in our cast had no idea what they were doing. And this was their first experience. So the guy who played Max, Uncle Max, the guy who's obsessed with getting them produced and getting money off of them and stuff.
Yeah.
The man who played him, Clifton Keene, huge shout out, love that guy. He jumped in and directed what he could, but we opened in 2 weeks at that point. And at the end of every single night, it was like, oh, this is not a job well done.
So do you have a lot of baggage when you watch this film? Just memories come flooding back?
The thing that really comes flooding back to me is how even after reading the script with the cast at our first rehearsal, a lot of us were thinking and saying to each other, oh, wow, the movie is so much better than the stage show.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's kind of interesting because at this point we've covered West Side Story, which I think is a movie that does a really good job of getting what was on stage and what you would see on stage into a film. And then we have Mary Poppins, which is a completely original musical and is kind of showing what the difference between an original show on stage and an original show written for a film can be. And then we have Sound of Music, but the way it makes itself a good movie is by changing pretty much everything about the show. And it cuts full numbers and moves stuff around. The person who we have to thank for Sound of Music's success truly is Ernest Lehman, who wrote the screenplay. He took the book of the show. He took the popular film adaptation of the story that was released in Germany called The Von Trapp Family, that was a huge hit in Germany.
Not a musical, by the way, right?
Not a musical. It is a semi-musical because there are parts where they are singing on stage.
The real people do sing, so yeah.
Yes. And then he read the book that this whole thing was based off of, the memoir that Maria wrote herself, and combined all of those elements together and made a much better screenplay with much better dialogue and flipped the songs all around in a way that makes sense. So much sense that when you see a stage production or read the script for the stage production, all you can think is, wow, this dialogue sucks. This is not a very good show. So that's how I feel about The Sound of Music. I think that it exists perfectly as this weird, perfect movie. And the stage version, honestly, is not very good. And everyone who ever wants to do the stage version wants to emulate the film in a live setting for people. But it is actually impossible to emulate the kind of energy and charm this film has on stage, because so much of it comes from its film nature and the fact that it saw the script for the stage show and said, no, we're not doing any of that.
Okay, so even though you really appreciate the film, and even though a lot of people paid money to go see it back in the day, critics in 1965 were not very kind. It was a pretty mixed reception, and our boy at the New York Times, Bosley Crowther,
the Boz,
had some really nasty things to say about The Sound of Music. He does point out that the stage musical, which ran for 3.5 years on Broadway, was very weak.
Funnily enough, the producer of this film at 20th Century Fox, who wanted it to be made, took so many directors to go see the Broadway show, and every single one of them afterwards said, absolutely not.
Yeah, William Wyler, I read, was like, no way.
Oh, we are gonna get to the Willie. There's a real catchy phrase in here that killed me. Julie Andrews also seems to realize this whole thing is being staged by Robert Wise in a cozy come corny fashion that even theater people know is old hat, but she goes at it happily and bravely. Cozy come corny is really great. Yeah, he really appreciates Julie Andrews' performance, which I definitely think is the anchor of the film.
Truly, yeah. And no one else was considered for that role. It was her from the get-go, right?
The producer knew who she was and was actually considering her because of My Fair Lady. But keep in mind, when this film was going into production, Mary Poppins hadn't released yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe it was Robert Wise and the producer, while they were searching for talent, the producer had brought up Julie Andrews and then had heard she was in an unreleased Disney project that was a musical where she was playing a nanny. And so they got to go to a screening of some dailies or something. They pretty much watched a reel of the film. And Robert Wise said, we have to snatch this woman up before people know who she is. And then from that point forward, it was inevitable.
Yeah, it feels that way. Inevitable. It's always kind of entertaining to read reviews where the critic just doesn't hold back. I don't think a lot of this is fair, because like I said, I actually really liked this movie. But it is kind of fun to read a Bosley Crowther review where he just really doesn't seem to like the film. He's kind of nasty here.
Yeah.
It's not a trait I love in critics, honestly. Like, I get it. It's fun to read mean reviews, but it's also, they're mean. They're mean sometimes. Unnecessarily so.
I would agree. For the reaction to be this wide as far as the negative reception, I can imagine something this sentimental and schmaltzy, for instance, being compared naturally to the civil rights movement, to things that are happening in this year. I can imagine people just thinking this is too syrupy for what's happening in the world right now.
And there is comparisons to be made with Mary Poppins for sure.
But that film
feels like a fantasy, like a real fairy tale. Mm-hmm. Whereas this definitely seems like it's trying to make a statement about authoritarianism. And yeah, maybe that just comes across as really lazy to certain critics. Okay, Pauline Kael.
Very famous review.
Which I could not find. I was desperately trying to find this review because I know Pauline Kael as a critic is coming up in the world and she's about to kind of be a real voice, if she isn't already considered that. But the quote I found was, "This is the sugar-coated lie people seem to want to eat, turned into emotional and aesthetic imbeciles when we hear ourselves humming the sickly, goody-goody songs."
Again, if you were not in the right mood to be charmed and to sort of be vulnerable to something like this, it definitely is a lot. And then after it's a lot, it starts being a lot, but Nazis are involved. So I really can genuinely see how if you're not vibing with it, the whole thing falls apart. I truly can see that.
Yeah, yeah. And I know Robert Wise mentioned that the critics on the East Coast, people closer to Broadway, really seem to despise it. And then a lot of the trades in Hollywood and on the West Coast were a little bit more accepting.
Circling back to what we were saying earlier, the producers, even when they were watching the film, were terrified because they thought it looked beautiful and they could tell all of the money was on screen. But the film had gone over time and over budget. And then they watched it and thought that the whole thing was cornball and there was no way anybody would want to watch it. And so they did a test screening. It's not even in LA. It was in, I want to say it was Michigan. They did a test screening in some random spot, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. And everybody loved it. And so they thought, oh, we might have a big success on our hands, but critics are going to hate this. So they were thinking that before the film had even been released, that this will be good for the people, bad for the critics. And that was how the roadshow of it was devised, was to take it city to city for a few months so that it could get really good buzz and word of mouth from people. And it's just so funny that they were able to know that was what was going to happen, that the producers had their fingers that much on the pulse of what modern critics were thinking. And I do believe that there is a certain amount of resistance against how much the public was already in love with this movie by the time critics were seeing it and reviewing it. I truly think that has something to do with it as well.
But yeah, they're wrong. I mean, they're just opinions. But yeah, this movie makes an unbelievable amount of money for the 1960s. I mean, Bosley Crowther mentions in his review that it's going to be a great success. The producers know what they're doing.
But it is weird that's like, oh, the only problem she had was that she was a little too aloof and immature. And now that she's getting married, she's going to become mature now. And I can see it. I can see how that would make people upset. So I don't think this film is quite on the same level of impeccable taste and precision on display in Mary Poppins, but I still really love it.
Yeah. There's also the abstinence song later in the film. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes. That was added in as well.
I don't know. Just felt weird. But I don't want to make this a podcast about our opinions in relationship to the critics. I do want to focus on the history of this film and some of the behind the scenes drama that I kind of want to know about.
Oh, I got some good stuff for you.
Yeah, give it to me.
I first off want to talk about the structure of the Broadway show. As I mentioned, a lot of changes were made. Just to give you a couple, my favorite things was a song sung between Maria and the Reverend Mother as the song of the Reverend Mother sort of getting Maria to get into a flitty mood so that she can say, look, you can't be a nun feeling these sort of ways. You've got to go and be a governess. Mm-hmm. And then when the rainstorm hits and everyone is in the bed, that is when she sings the goat song as a story to calm everybody down. There is no puppet show in the original stage show at all. There are two songs which I have heard them performed multiple times, and I can tell you with absolute certainty they are useless numbers that don't do anything for the story and should not be in the show, that are sung between Max and the Baroness.
Okay.
And those two characters just don't matter in the grand scheme of things. And there are children who don't get solos and don't get things to do in the show. And the children are actually a really important part of the story. And then Max and Elsa getting a song, getting two different numbers together on top of that. It just is too much. And then at the end, Edelweiss is sung, and that's the only time it's sung. And it was the screenwriter, Ernest. He was the one that said, well, we can't have this gorgeous song just be sung at the end of the movie and that's it. So it was his idea to have that be brought into the first act and have that be the song that the captain sings to the children when he decides to assimilate with them essentially and become the Von Trapp family singers.
Yeah.
So it's just these things that, again, when you're watching the film, the pacing of it feels so natural, and the way it flows as a musical, you think, oh my gosh, this is such a good musical. And then you watch the stage version or you listen to it and you think, oh, man, they really knew what they were doing when they made that movie.
That's weird. That
script was written when they first were doing the show. He saw the other film and read the book and wrote that script. And the script was what they were shopping around to people after they were taking them to the Broadway show. And of all of the directors they took to the Broadway show, the only person who said he would be interested in directing it was Robert Wise. However, he had another film that he was already in pre-production for. They brought William Wyler to see the Broadway show, and he was not a big fan of it at all. But he read the script and said, no, the changes here are really good. I can make this movie. But that screenwriter, Ernest Lehman, was completely unconvinced of William Wyler's dedication to sparkle motion. He was not feeling his energy at all and was telling the producers he is going to drop out. We are starting all the cogs up and we are not going to have a director. And then 2 weeks before filming was supposed to start, William Wyler said, oh, I have a script I've been wanting to make for forever. I'm leaving this project. And he ditched him. Ernest had already sent a copy of the script to Robert Wise and said, give this another read. And Robert Wise's other film that was in production had to be pushed back because of other concerns. And so he said, okay, I will come on and direct this. Now that we've seen a Robert Wise film and William Wyler films for this podcast, it just feels like that is the obvious choice to make.
William Wyler is a great director, though. We're talking about Ben-Hur and Best Years of Our Lives is the other two films that he directed in our list. I feel like he's a professional director. I'm surprised he dropped out 2 weeks before. That just doesn't sound professional.
I think that he genuinely hated the script and hated the show and did not want to make the movie. I think Ernest was to be trusted on that one.
Doesn't this just all sound incredibly stressful, this whole filmmaking business?
Yes. So, yes, at that point, Ernest Lehman already had said that he wanted Julie Andrews as Maria. And then Robert Wise and the producer had a discussion where they also thought Julie Andrews might be good for the role. And then, as I said, they went and watched the Mary Poppins reel and said, oh, we've got to get her right now. And so they brought her on then. And she was allegedly a complete delight to work with. Something that I think goes unstated and underappreciated about her performance in this film specifically, all of the songs in Sound of Music are pre-recorded and then they lip sync to them when they're filming. Okay. And that's how they did. That's how they did for all musicals back then. But something that Julie Andrews does so well in this film is that she is able to make her dialogue sound as if she is still in this sort of sing-song nature.
Yeah.
She was saying that she was in the recording studio and at first she was recording these songs as if she was recording them for an album. And then as she was listening to them back, she told them that we can't use those. I just realized I'm not really making much in the way of acting decisions and I don't know how to perform that within the film. And so then she started actually performing the scenes right before the songs in the recording studio. And the way she transitions the dialogue sequences into musical sequences with her voice alone is so impressive. And to know that she had to do that before she'd ever even been on set and didn't even know what things were going to look like and hadn't even been in a costume, pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, it feels very natural. I do love that aspect of this film in particular. Sometimes musicals and the musical sections of musicals don't feel quite right. I've talked to people who are very resistant to the genre as a whole because of that. But I love the way Julie Andrews transitions into her songs. And her entire character just feels like the kind of person that would break out into song. I think it's also a testament to her skills as an actor that even though Maria and Mary Poppins are kind of on paper the same character.
Yes.
she plays them vastly differently and both very, very well.
Yeah, she plays them completely differently. One knows about everything going on and is completely in control of everything, and the other is way more naive and is sort of being tossed about by the world at first before she finds her grounding. And yeah, it's really impressive to watch her play both.
Yeah, now her co-star.
Yes. So
who I quite liked.
Oh, people hated his performance. Even the people who liked the movie at the time. I really like his performance in this as well. We are talking of Christopher Plummer.
Yeah.
The one thing objectively true, I mean, he is so hot in this movie. It's out of control. He could blow that little whistle at me as long as he wanted to. You know what I mean?
Yes.
He was not quite as pleasant to work with. Again, he was Ernest Lehman's number one choice for the role. And they said, oh, we want you to fly in and do this reading. And he said, no, I've seen the show. It's horrible. I won't play that role. And so they ended up flying to him and giving him the script and letting him do a screen test inside of his house. And he said, well, the script is much better than the show, but I still feel like I need to take some liberties to make this character in any way relatable. And he has a really good point, because that is the number one flaw of the stage show. Captain Von Trapp is essentially a non-character in the stage version of The Sound of Music.
That's interesting. Okay.
So Christopher Plummer, people might have hated his performance at the time, but he definitely improved the role as far as his input is concerned. The commentary track I listened to with him and Julie Andrews, the girl who played Liesel, and the choreographer, was very interesting because he barely speaks at all. And whenever he does, he talks about how stupid this entire movie is. He is not a fan to this day because this was recorded on the film's 50th anniversary. One of my favorite things he says, well, my character's name was Georg, so there's only so much you can do with something like that. It doesn't even make any sense, but it's funny. and he talked about how he was just getting drunk every single night and would make everybody who was in the hotel with him stay up all night with him. And once they wanted to go to bed, he would scream at them.
God, what? What?
I should mention in that commentary track, everyone is speaking separately. They're just edited in, but it isn't like a group recording.
Oh.
So whenever it does come into Christopher Plummer talking, it sounds as if he is actively getting drunker and drunker as they are having him record this commentary track. Every time you cut back to him, he's just getting a little bit more scathing and he's sounding just a little less in control of what he's talking about. But the funny part is that the actress who plays Liesel then confirms what he's been saying in her own section of the commentary, where she says, oh, I really loved staying in the hotel with Christopher Plummer. He and I got along really, really well. It was just really strange because I had just turned 21 and I wasn't really sure how alcohol even worked, and I hadn't even drunk before. And the next thing I knew, I was getting absolutely sloshed every single night with Christopher Plummer and the choreographer and the producers. And then once I wanted to go to bed, he would start screaming at me from the piano that he was playing and would scream at everybody when they wanted to go to bed because all he wanted to do was stay up all night and drink.
I don't know, man. That sounds like a bad work environment.
A little bit. She talks about how during the filming of 16 going on 17, she sprained her ankle.
Okay.
And in older versions of the movie, you can see the bandage on her ankle.
They George Lucas the bandage out?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And then she says, well, I sprained my ankle, but there was no cut or blood. And so I told them I could keep going, and they gave me a vitamin B12. And she says, but then as I started thinking back and multiple people would ask me, how on earth were you able to dance like that and do that entire dance sequence? She started to realize that it wasn't a vitamin B12 she'd been given. It was an upper. And when you watch her eyes in that sequence specifically, you can totally see it. Like, you can totally see that she's like on something.
sounds terrible. What kind of backyard film set is this?
She is spilling tea throughout the whole commentary track. There is no quality control at all when it comes to her or Christopher Plummer. And it's so funny because Julie Andrews definitely is the main star of the commentary track.
Yeah.
And she has nothing but these kind, nice things to say and about how joyous it was and how well she got along with the children and how they were all still friends today. But then, yeah, the actress playing Liesel comes in and just is like, oh, yeah, I was on uppers, downers, and candy corns, and I was being thrown into the water, and the next thing I know, I had to dance. But Christopher Plummer talks about how he legitimately despised the children and did not enjoy working with them when he was on set. And then that gets confirmed by Julie Andrews. She's talking about the sequence where they're all singing to the Baroness, and he comes in and is blown away by the fact that they can all sing. You know, that sort of switch moment with his character. Mm-hmm. And she says this so casually. She's like, and if you look closely, you can see the actresses playing Gretel and Brigitte are crying when they realize that he comes in. And that's actually real, because when he came in and started singing with them, the face he gave them and the kindness he showed them, they started to think, oh, he really does like us. And she said, oh, those were all real emotions the children were feeling because they truly felt that Christopher Plummer did not like them at all. And then Christopher Plummer comes in and says, I hated those kids. And
oh my God. Oh my God.
It's pretty great.
He might not appreciate me saying it, but I really enjoyed him in this role. I thought he did a great job.
Oh, I think he's incredible in it, especially knowing how much input he had and how much he did for the character and having the point of reference of what he had to work with. I think that he's amazing in this movie.
Yeah. You mentioned that they were on a soundstage. I would have guessed that this entire film was shot on location. It looks really, really gorgeous. Now, I know they built sets, but I think they're seamlessly intertwined.
Do you want to hear something that really trips you out?
Yeah.
The location for the exterior of the house and the location for the lake were two different locations, and every time you're in that backyard, that's a composite. It looks seamless. And it is funny because you see the kids and her in the lake, and the villa is in the foreground, but you never actually see them cross into it. You never see them walk out of the lake and into it. It just cuts to them being inside of it, and the lake is still in the background, and it looks completely seamless. But those were two completely different locations. And there are exteriors of sets that have locations behind them. They're inside of locations and have sets and stuff filling in parts of it, and none of it looks at all conspicuous. It's crazy to me, even in a 4K restoration Blu-ray. And yeah, I think it's just a real testament to the craftsmanship and artistry that went into this film, that it looks so seamless. The Abbey, they weren't allowed to film inside of the Abbey. They were only allowed to film the courtyard and the exterior shots. So whenever you see them in the courtyard, they're in the actual Abbey. But when you're inside of the Abbey, that was a set they designed, and it's so big. It looks like an actual huge abbey on the inside.
The cemetery might be the only set that kind of stood out to me as not looking quite right. I think the backgrounds didn't quite work.
Yeah, that nighttime sky background. It's also like when you see it from the outside, there's just the one courtyard. So where is that? Why is it open to the sky? Yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
I would not have guessed any of that for the villa. I would have assumed that was all just on location.
It's insane, man.
In one location.
I love it. There's so much to actually legitimately appreciate about this movie as a film that it just blows my mind, because it's also just, I think, just sort of a treasure.
Do you appreciate the reflections on World War II and Nazism? Do you not like that part of the film?
I didn't say I didn't like it.
Okay, you just sighed.
I just do think it's the thing that ages this movie in a weird way.
I'll tell you what it felt like. It felt like suddenly we were whisked away into not a historical drama, but a Indiana Jones film. The Nazis are
yes,
comic bad guys.
I agree with that. It's the whole film is very sentimental and sweet and for the whole family. But then it gets to real stuff about the real world that actually happened truly within the perspective of things not that long ago from the time this movie is being filmed. And it approaches those real world horrors and real world situations with the same sort of two-dimensional sentimentality that it approaches the rest of the film with. But also, that's what really happened. Well, not exactly what really happened, but that is the general gist of what actually happened with this family. And there's no way you tell this story without getting to that point. And I do think it's done about as well as it could possibly be done. Definitely done way better than in the stage show.
It's such a weird tonal shift, but the film wouldn't be the same film at all. It wouldn't have the same impact without it.
Yeah. And again, I don't even necessarily dislike it.
Yeah.
I do like that little bit of tension in the third act. But as you said, I would call it more akin to an Indiana Jones film than I would some film that was actually about the horrors of Nazism.
Yeah.
But I do love Indiana Jones movies.
And then the nuns dismantle their cars.
It's a good joke. It is a good joke. Reverend Mother, I have sinned.
Yeah, so it all feels just a little cheesy, but whatever.
And that's not in the stage version either. In the stage version, they run into Rolf, and then Rolf is a coward and doesn't... For the purpose of the story, he considers himself a coward because he is unable to bring himself to call the Nazi soldiers when he sees the family, and he lets them escape.
Mm.
And that's what happens in the stage show. It's so much more dramatically satisfying for him to scream out and turn them in. And then the reason they're able to get away is because the nuns dismantled the cars. That's so funny.
I do think it's worth noting how close this is to World War II. Just 20 years prior was when the war ended. So this is relatively recent history.
But also there's a whole generation of people now who are making movies and in the film industry and making art that are fully in their 20s who have no real recollection of World War II.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the same time, even though it's kind of recent history, it makes sense that the Nazis would just be cast as sort of bland bad guys at this point.
It sort of is reminding me of this current generation coming up now who don't have the sort of historical knowledge or sentimentality that we do concerning 9/11.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
and I kind of love it because I just like seeing culture evolve, and I don't think that's exactly what's happening here. I don't think they necessarily think it's funny, but they definitely think it's something worthy of making into a family-friendly musical.
Yeah, exactly. The other film we watched that was reflecting on the war, the only other one in the list so far has been The Cranes Are Flying, which was very dark, down to earth, just a really gritty look at the war. Not even Nazis, just the war and how war is horrifying.
The best years of our lives as well.
Yeah, I almost consider that a movie that came out during the war just because 1946 is so close. But yeah, that's a reflection. You're right. And there's plenty of interesting things to talk about there, which you should listen to. That episode is available right now for our loyal listeners, if you haven't yet heard it.
Only available on iTunes. No, I'm just kidding. It's not even on
It's
iTunes.
available
everywhere. I just wanted to say that.
Now, we've kind of talked about this film's success, its reputation, and yeah, just how it was the biggest thing of all time ever. I didn't know it had any sort of life on television, though. What is this? You put it in the show notes.
Oh, this is so crazy to me.
Okay.
When television broadcasts of films in the 70s became sort of a big trend, this was a film that everyone was trying to acquire to be able to air on television for the ratings.
Ah.
I don't remember exactly which network it was that got the rights to it, but they did. And it came with a Julie Andrews introduction, and then they cut 30 minutes out of the film so that it would be 3 hours with commercial breaks. And then, this was what was really interesting to me. They aired it later, and they did it with a commercial-free 3-hour block And the only thing it didn't include was the intermission and the entr'acte. And that also had an introduction from Julie Andrews where she was describing why the film would occasionally have black bars on the top and bottom. And it was because they put all of the musical numbers in letterbox format on television. And it was the first time a television broadcast had put anything in letterbox format. And I think that's really interesting. And they fully had to have Julie Andrews say, now, the black bars on the top and bottom doesn't mean anything's wrong with your television.
Yeah.
With our generation, with you and me specifically, you know, I think we can both relate to watching DVDs take that journey. You know, at first it was all full screen, pan and scan nonsense.
Oh, yeah, so gross.
And then it came with an option of saying, would you like to watch the widescreen or full screen version? And now it's just culturally accepted that you watch it in widescreen. I don't know. It's so interesting for me to think about this film sort of pioneering that aspect of home media viewing, of saying this is how the film is meant to be watched. So you're going to watch just these specific scenes in widescreen, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it also made me weirdly nostalgic of the time when that was my thing. I mean, I was in middle school. I still have vivid memories of it, of saying, don't watch full screen. Don't ever watch full screen, you know? And I don't know, now no one's TV even does that, you know?
Andrew, you can rest easy. You won that battle.
I won it, man. I want to win the 120 hertz battle next that I stated in Eyes Without a Face.
Oh, yes.
That's the next to the scrubbing. Yes. That's what I want to win next.
A worthy cause. Keep fighting the good fight, Andrew. We need people like you.
You know I will. We gotta take down those Nazis. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that was really interesting. And also, it really was the most watched. The predictions were completely correct. It was the most watched television broadcast. It was huge ratings. And it's also just crazy to me to think of a film acquisition being that big of a deal for a television studio. Right. Because now film acquisitions going through TV studios, first of all, the studio that produces it and distributes it in the first place is already a complete indicator of what channel it's going to end up on. It's not like an acquisition thing.
Right.
And now it's owned by Disney, you know? It's gone through this whole evolution, and now it actually is a Disney movie in a weird way. Something that I was like, I'm going to bring up during this point. I still haven't. We were corrected on something in our West Side Story episode, and there is no more perfect episode to mention it in than this one. Also, for people who do listen every week, this is the actual length of time between recording and releasing for us. The West Side Story episode just released to you guys this week, and now we're recording this episode. So just putting things in perspective.
Yeah.
But the voice for Natalie Wood's character is not unknown. She is a famous actress named Marni Nixon. I shouldn't say famous actress, famous singer named Marni Nixon. And she also did the voice for Audrey Hepburn's character in the My Fair Lady film. And then in this movie, she plays Sister Sophie, not a very large role. But yeah, she was actually cast in this film, and she was cast in this film, again, by Bob Wise, who had known of her work because she was the one who sang for Natalie Wood in West Side Story, and he wanted to give her an actual screen presence in this movie, even though she doesn't do much at all. And we were corrected by a very loyal listener. His name is Pierre. He's wonderful. He always reaches out and is great. He was the one that said, wait, no, that was Marni Nixon. It wasn't just some unknown person. So thank you for that correction. Sorry that it's taken us so long to get it into an episode that we corrected it, but...
And if you, as a loyal listener, want to point out any other instances that Andrew has been wrong, you can always go to our Facebook page, A Century in Cinema, and message
and then
us.
And then a month and a half later, the episode with the correction will be released. I do try to make sure I'm well researched, but yes, that was a huge miss for me.
Oh, I told you at the beginning of this whole project that I'm just terrified of being wrong on the internet. Like, this is all recorded and...
Oh, yes. Now, I mentioned it, too, during the project, was realizing that I'm the one spreading this information to people, and
right.
I don't want to give people bad information. So I will always come in with a correction when it needs to be put out there.
Well, very good. I think this was a successful, insightful episode on The Sound of Music. Thank you very much, Andrew, for all you've done. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave the listeners with?
I really enjoy this film, and I do think it is a great family movie, and I think there is space for that, although I would agree the third act is a little weird. But I like this film a lot.
Yeah, I really like this film. Highly recommend it. Anyone who just wants a nice, sentimental film for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the music.
Oh, it's so good. Oh, I didn't even mention that I Have Confidence in Me was a song written for the film. And that's the best song in the movie. I love it.
Oh, yes. That's the one where she's skipping to the finish at the beginning. Oh, very good. Yeah. Dumb. That's like that's the I Want song. You need that.
Yes.
Dumb. That's shocking to me that the musical was that bad.
Yeah. It was shocking to me too, man.
They put it together. It's a good film. What are we watching next week, though?
Yeah, I would say that next week it won't be just me talking for an hour and a half and never letting Arthur get in a word edgewise. But that's just not going to be the case. Because next week's film is Persona by Ingmar Bergman.
Don't worry, I'll ask you questions here and there.
The loyal listeners know, I mean, I've been building to the Bergman episode, talking about what he's releasing every year when he releases, and this is considered to be one of the many pinnacles of his career, and I'm very excited to discuss it. I know this is the third movie in a row I'm saying this, but it blows my mind you have not seen Persona.
Yeah, it was one of those films alongside, I don't know, Tokyo Story. There's a ton of classics I just haven't seen, but I remember this one specifically being recommended to me my first year in film school. It just feels like the kind of thing that as a film student you are required to watch, and I didn't. So I'm about 10 years late. Sorry, everyone. But that's what this project is. I'm catching up.
So envious you're about to watch this for the first time. What Bergman have you seen?
Yeah, I watched Seventh Seal my first year in film school.
Smiles of a Summer Night?
No.
Oh my goodness.
Ingmar Bergman, he's the fan of Victor Sjöström, right?
Yes, huge fan.
Man, we're going all the way back to the beginning of the podcast with The Phantom Carriage. Following up on that.
There's so much I want to talk about, but that will be nice to get to circle back. So,
well, great. Looking forward to that. And yeah, be envious. I get to watch this for the very first time.
If you get a chance to watch it earlier in the week so you can watch it a second time later in the week, I truly would recommend it. Okay. But it is an elusive, artistic film, and I am very excited to discuss it, especially in reference to where we are in the 60s, where we are in Bergman's career. Yeah, okay, I'll stop, but I'm very excited.
As always, you can find where to stream or rent the films like Persona that we talk about in our show notes of the podcast. I do want to express a huge thank you to Nathan Royal for our show's music. I actually went on a hike with Nathan today. We went up and we're just talking on a hike. It was lovely.
Did you tell him that I was the one who appreciates his music? Who brought that back into the show? Did you tell him you forgot about him?
I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.
When it came to how do you solve a problem like Maria, I was thinking, how do you spell a last name like Venema? I know that's like pronouncing it wrong, but that was what I had in my head.